afternoon, everyone. My name is Tina Srivastav. I am a co-chair of the speakers and panels for the MIT Sloan CIO Symposium. And this afternoon, I have the honor of introducing the Security and Privacy panel. You know, this morning we heard the CIOs discuss that the #1 question they face is security. Devices use many methods in addition to the internet to communicate. Any digital enterprise must protect its own infrastructure and information against compromise. However, the Internet of Things, bring your own device, and cloud computing applications are changing the stakes on what it means to be secure. This panel will explore the implications of recent major compromises in big enterprises. Is your enterprise secure against the next generation of attacks, including protocol-level attacks and the advanced persistent threat? Our moderator today is MIT Sloan professor Joe Hadzima. Joe has been involved in the founding of more than 100 companies in the roles of director, manager, legal counsel, employee. He's well known across the MIT Sloan community. He's also the founder of the MIT 100K business plan competition and teaches the popular nuts and bolts of the business plan class at MIT since 1989. I also have the privilege of introducing our speakers today. First, we have Patrick Gilmore, who is the CTO of the Markley Group, which is a telecommunications and data center operator. But prior to Markley, Patrick also spent over 13 years as chief network architect at Akamai. Rob May is the CEO and co-founder of Backupify, and also a veteran speaker at our MIT Sloan CIO Symposium. He actually started his career as a digital design engineer at Harris and co-founded Backupify in 2008. And finally, we have Mark Morrison, the Senior Vice President and Chief Information Security Officer at State Street. Mark has over 30 years of experience in information systems and network security engineering. His previous positions include the Deputy Chief Information Security Officer for the U.S. Department of Defense and the U.S. Intelligence Community Chief Information Security Officer. Our panelists today will help engage and answer your questions, so please come forward and use these microphones at the front when you do have questions. It's my pleasure to introduce Joe Hadzima, our moderator.
Thank you, Tina. I thought I would take a moment and sort of set the stage. Many of you may know some of these figures, but just so we're all on the same page. 2013 has been called the year of the mega breach. We know about the Target situation, where 110 million customer identities and accounts were compromised, and it led to the ouster of both the CIO and the CEO. 90 class action suits were filed as a result of that, and probably still will be filed. We also have the NSA situation and the implications of that. Symantec reports that for 2013, there were 253 total breaches, which was 62% greater than in 2012. 552 million identities were breached. That's just a phenomenal number. And another report stated that for each identity breached, the cost over a 2-year period is about $200. So we're talking some big money here. We also saw the beginning of attacks related to the Internet of Things, including baby monitors being hacked and certainly cars being taken over. The top causes of the data breaches in 2013 I thought was interesting. The 43% were hackers, 29% were accidental breaches, including loss of USB devices. So 27% was theft or loss of a computer, and insider theft was 6% of the cases. all this means that security and privacy is becoming a more top-level visible thing for CEOs at boards. And that's the background in which we're going to have a discussion today. I thought I'd break out the panel into sort of 3 general areas, and we'll take them serially and then try to tie it together a bit at the end. The first is, what is the state of the world out there today? The second is, because we're here at MIT with lots of innovation, where do small and emerging companies and technologies fit in to this problem? And then finally, as we heard during the CIO panel before lunch, the organizational and cultural issues become important on how you go forward. So starting with the first one, the state of the world, and we chatted a little bit at lunch about this. Nobody on the panel has any inside information about what happened at Target, but what can we surmise about what Target did right or did wrong before the breach occurred? Does anyone have a comment about that? Without.
So I'll start.
Okay.
So probably one of the easiest ones to point at, and a bit of self-serving, is that one of the issues is that apparently that Target did not have a professional chief information security officer or really a robust staff, and I think I'm not sure that would have necessarily prevented or even had mitigated any of the attack that was perpetuated. But I think one of the critical areas that came out during a lot of the discussion and open source information about the Target attack was how they responded. And I think having a more of a professionalized information security organization may have given them an upper hand in being able to actually detect and deter and actually respond to that sophisticated level of attack in a more timely and in a more aggressive manner. So that would be my on the Target aspect. But I think with the Target attack and then the subsequent 0 days that we've seen recently with the OpenSSL Heartbleed in the Internet Explorer, and I guess we had some recent one with the Black Shades. But I think that what that really points to is, and this is where we need to convey at the board level down, and we've been trying to do that at where I work and from where I was in previous jobs, is that we have definitely about 3 or 4 years ago have taken a strong shift in what our attacker and adversary profiles look like. We are way past the reputational and the hacktivists and the folks that are doing it for fun to prove that it can be done. We're more into a very organized, professional, in a lot of cases, nation-state supported, organized, funded, and driven set of adversaries. We're seeing an unprecedented level of cooperation between previously unaffiliated cyber criminals and hacktivists and other type of hacker type of organizations with nation states that are using them as cyber mercenaries or proxies to actually perpetuate both their strategic and their tactical goals from a nation state. A lot of obviously the tier 1 or the higher nation states have actually fully integrated cyber into their war planning activities. So they're no longer saying it's just going to be a kinetic attack. They actually believe they're going to support any type of military activity will be in conjunction with a series of cyber-related activities as well, directed against their adversaries to achieve their goals. So I think the big thing to come out of this is that it's not your, it's not your grandmother's hacker anymore. It is, the tactics and techniques and the tradecraft are constantly being refined, and they are, again, having the advantage of the dedication on their part, and we have to be right, all the old cliches that you want to use, we have to be right every time, they only have to be right once kind of stuff. I think we've got to appreciate that, and we've got to build in the agility in the infrastructure and the defensive countermeasures to be reactive, not just relying on preventive and build the wall higher and wider because you're going to run out of wall. You've got to be able to put your emphasis on putting more into detection and remediation, and still do the prevention, but you've got to realize that prevention is not going to be your sole defensive measure anymore.
Well, that becomes more interesting as we heard about the digital enterprise and actually not walling off the company but expanding out, which leads us into things like the cloud or what was in the paper the other day, the fog. So I talked to Patrick about that, and you had some views on what the world's looking like from a infrastructure viewpoint, and that has to be taken into account in the enterprise.
So it should be no surprise to anybody in this room, or frankly, hopefully anybody anywhere, that employees have devices that you cannot control. More importantly, perhaps, they have data stored in places that you cannot control. How many of your employees, for instance, have a computer at home that isn't on your network and they want to work on a document, so they put it up on Google Drive or Dropbox or Box.net or something like that. And then you have to worry about what happens if Box.net is hacked. And I'm not throwing them under the bus, I'm just saying that this is one of the things you have to worry about. That's just the first and most obvious level. It gets a lot worse once you realize the fog is this idea that there's not just things up in the cloud, but there are things all around you. The whole idea of the Internet of Things where your toaster has an IP address, well, that's nice and all, and it's dangerous, and maybe it gets hacked and sends out spam or something like that. But think about this real quickly for a second. And this is very, very, very old attack that most people today don't even think about, but it's still in existence. How many of you would be very, very upset if every document you ever printed was read by somebody you didn't want to read it? Those HP JetDirect cards, they have IP addresses, and they are not secure. The people writing embedded systems, the people writing software that goes on tiny little ASICs and tiny little computers in devices that you don't realize are actually computers, in devices that you don't realize are connected to the internet, they're not thinking about things like Stack Overflow. They're not thinking about things like bounds checking, or frankly, checking to make sure that the person sending the command is the person that should be sending the command. These devices need to be secured, and they are not, at least in most of the plans I've seen, even considered in most CIO security plans. People talk about hardening your Microsoft Windows, your Linux servers, making sure your mail server is right, getting the right contracts with your outsourced providers, but none of them stop to think about, well, what if my printer is hacked and every document the CEO prints is actually read by the competitors or printed somewhere on a blog? Could be bad. The Internet of Things, the idea of the fog, the idea of, as more and more devices, for ease of use and really good reasons. I mean, you want to be able to manage these things centrally or remotely, and you want to have the ability to print from your iPhone and stuff like that. So there are good reasons to do this, but realize that the other end of that connection is a device that you are probably not considering today, and you need to be. Because there's stuff going through there, there's information, there's possibility of a launching point for an internal attack, there's ways to use that device to attack other people and make you get the blame. These are devices that you must consider. And like I said, most of the CIO security documents that I've seen don't even mention them. So it's time to start thinking about it.
So definitely a changed world. Rob, your company does backups for people in the cloud. Why?
Correct.
Why would, Rob, why do you exist?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So
I thought the cloud was secure.
Yeah, so I'll talk a little bit about something that Patrick touched on, which is this idea that if you put data in Google Apps or Dropbox or Box or whatever, that oh, it's secure, they're taking care of my backups. And they are. They're taking care of the backups from their perspective, right? So their servers break down or whatever happens, and they're fine, they'll recover. But one of the early things we saw, we sort of stumbled into this market. We were doing a Gmail backup for consumers, and IT managers started calling us, and they would say things like, oh, we're using iPhones at work now. And you know what's going to happen, Rob, is my CEO is going to put some app on his iPhone to synchronize his Gmail, and there's a whole bunch of these apps, and I don't know who wrote them, and I can't screen them all, whatever. So when one of them has a bug and deletes his Gmail instead, I just want a quick way to get it back. So we sort of battle this problem that people aren't really sure exists, but we have 8,000 customers. We restored 9 million files in Q1. So we know that you put data in the cloud, you don't have your own copy. You have all your eggs in one basket. And if you have a malicious insider employee, if you have accidental deletion, if you have all these collaboration apps that are touching every part of your cloud infrastructure, it can quickly become a mess and you're out of control. And it's not just us in backup, right? There are a bunch of companies, a bunch here in the Boston area, like CloudLock and some other companies that are looking at who's this data being shared with and who has access to it. And you put your data in the cloud and you have a whole bunch of problems. So
Yeah, one thing I mentioned to Rob earlier is data doesn't just replicate, corruption replicates. If you take a document and you accidentally delete the whole thing and then save it and you have a backup, well, it'll back up that blank document very well. And you'll have a really good copy of a blank document. Merry Christmas.
So if originally we were self-contained units of computing power, and now we're moving out to the cloud and we're moving into the fog, let's take that intermediate step to the cloud. What kind of questions should CIOs being asked of cloud providers? What are the top concerns that they ought to have in moving out to that next layer out?
Well, as a cloud provider,
Yeah, what questions do you get asked, I guess? And what should they ask you?
I'm feeling like this is a sort of a catch-22 here. I don't know if I should answer the question truthfully, but frankly, most of the people that come to us don't ask the right questions. I'll be really frank. They're asking us things like, well, how much does it cost, and do you have a backup? And they think that that's a good set of questions. That's actually not a good set of questions. Now, fortunately, I think that we do a good job, and a lot of cloud providers do a good job, because we have, as Mark was mentioning, Target didn't have a full-time security staff. Well, we do, right? And we think that we are actually better at security than most of our customers are, because we do this 24/7. We're the persistent threat. We're the people that the attackers are actually going after in many, many cases. You think you're going after company X, but it turns out company X is hosted on a cloud provider. Well, that cloud provider has to be as secure as every company, not just one. So we think we do a good job there, but you should be looking at more in-depth, like asking the real questions. Well, what are your physical as well as software security methods? How long do you keep your backups in? How many versions of your backups do you keep, to go directly against what Rob was mentioning? I did mention physical, but I want to mention that again, because a lot of times these, quote unquote cloud devices, they're a real computer. They're physically located somewhere, right? So in my company, for instance, we have a degausser and a disk shredder that's DOD certified. A lot of places literally just throw their hard drives out when they're done with them. Is that where you want your data to go? These are the kind of questions that you need to look at when you're assessing a cloud provider. Now, lots of cloud providers are very good at this and have all the security mechanisms that, they're relatively standard, and a lot of them are shared across the industry. So you're going to be able to find a cloud provider that does the right thing. Just make sure you did find that one, and you're not going to somebody who didn't think about some of these things to start with.
So I'll add to that. I think you really need to dig into the terms of service. Like, I know they're boring to read and everything else, but one of our early customers was a company, an organization that moved to Google Apps that does some controversial things. And they wanted a backup of their Google Gmail data primarily, because they realized that Google's terms of service basically said, if for any reason we decide to kick you off, we can do it. Now, it's highly unlikely that would happen, but if you find yourself in that situation, it's really bad, right? You don't have your email now. So they actually made us run a test of, okay, if we move to Google Apps and we have these backups, can we stand up an Exchange server and be back on Exchange within 24 hours? And so, because of the controversial nature of their business, they were worried that at some point people could protest some of their suppliers like Google to stop supporting them. And so I think those are some of the things that you want to do sometimes when you're moving to these cloud providers, is really dig in and understand those terms of service and worst case scenarios, what you could be in for.
And just to finalize on this topic, I think the areas of concern is you really need to lay out what who's really responsible for what parts of the security. Because you think of cloud as this monolithic, and you say you're going to buy a cloud, but there's a lot of ways you buy cloud. It can be platform as a service, it can be infrastructure as a service, it can be software as a service, security as a service, or it can be some combination thereof. So you've really got to know what you're going to be responsible for, and you can't outsource all of the security to the cloud vendor, whatever one you choose, whether they're really good at it or less good at it. You have a certain responsibility of protecting your own information, certainly in a highly regulated environment like financial and banking. You are responsible to a level of protecting your data at the data level, at the application level. So I think there's a misnomer about that you're going to be able to outsource all of your cloud security to the cloud vendor. I think if you try that, you're going to get burnt. I also think that with cloud technologies, we may not be in the infancy, we may be in the wobbling toddler stage. But I think we haven't seen a lot of the more sophisticated levels of exploits based on the cloud infrastructure, both the hardware and software, that'll manifest themselves over time. So is cloud architecture more secure than the traditional ones? Most likely in most cases, but I don't think it's a security panacea that we're not going to see as more folks put their information out and more reliance on cloud technology. I think we're going to see a proliferation of more exploits and more vulnerabilities associated with that technology.
Well, we talk about the enterprise computing itself, the cloud, and something Patrick said sort of segued into one of the topics that was listed as for the program. And paraphrasing, it's Snowden used a USB drive to take the information out. Why are sophisticated organizations like NSA still falling prey to data loss attacks via USB? And what are organizations doing, or what should they be doing to anticipate the next generation of such attacks?
That is a really tough question. The problem is that the problem is multifold. How many people here have actually gone to a secure government facility? Anybody? Okay. When you walked in, they make you take out your cell phone. They search you for USB, whatever, blah, blah, blah. I used to have a USB watch, and they never took it. Not one time. It was just, a watch with a little USB dongle on the inside. Never took it. He has a USB pen.
There's a pen, a USB pen.
They didn't look at those things, right? So first of all, it's really hard to do these because, one, it's difficult to find them all. Data is very easy to extract and copy in many places. But the second way is that it turns out that the base level operating system on the computers that are running what you're talking about, once Snowden had, administrator access to a data, and he had that data somehow onto his particular laptop, because his administrator password allowed that, there is nothing in the OS currently, at least not without some very, very special stuff, and not the things that most people are running, certainly not things like Microsoft Windows, without ridiculously jumping through hoops. There's no way to tell that computer, do not copy this to a USB drive. It's not a standard thing. The amount of hacking you have to do to make the OS do that is insane. And then once you've done that, good luck getting any security patches or other things out of Microsoft to work on that particular hacked up system. So the problem is that data is ubiquitous and easy to transfer, and ones and zeros are ones and zeros. It doesn't really matter. So getting that onto a device is trivial. And I frankly don't see how you're going to stop that without air gapping the system and strip searching people going in and out of the room that has the data, which of course is not reasonable.
So this is really the whole issue of physical security, and don't we think our employees are honest, and don't we screen them? And so here we have somebody like NSA you'd think would have pretty good screening and pretty good physical security. What do you do with the employee issue, or even more so the third-party contractors that come in? That was part of the target problem, right? It was the HVAC controller having access to the network. But
I don't know. I think you just have to be diligent, right? I think I know from some people I know who used to do IT audit and also financial audit. When you look at issues of theft, whether it's financial or data related, it almost never starts like as somebody's intent, right? There are these slippery slopes that get you there where they realize that, oh, people can get around this thing, they can get around this control and that control, and next thing you know, they get bigger and bigger ideas, and they get in more and more tempted to do things that they shouldn't do. And so it seems a little heavy-handed, I think, sometimes to have strict processes and controls, particularly in this world now where it's like, oh, your work environment, particularly if you want to attract like a lot of these millennials, right? You got to be cool and hip, and everything's great and loosey-goosey, and that's actually kind of a terrible thing to do from a security perspective.
So a couple of things. One, again, coming from that world, two things. One, there's one theorem that's always true: security degrades over time. So no matter how much security you put in, because of operational constraints and human aspects, it degrades. There's a lot of indication in the case of Mr. Snowden that he came in with the intention of doing it, and there wasn't a, oh, look what I can do kind of thing. He actually came in intending to exfiltrate data. One of the other issues is allowing the thumb drives is, in addition to being a highly secure environment, of which NSA, it has its strengths and has its weaknesses, like most of the government agencies, they are an operational element. They do have to provide data to. They do support the warfighter. They do support the intelligence community. They do have to provide data. In order to do that, data has to flow, and I think our colleagues here have illustrated that. So part of that is to make you poke holes within the security. To make it operational, you have to poke certain holes within the security framework to make it operational. Where I am now, we get this conundrum all the time between me trying to enforce and trying to enhance the security, and then the reality is that the bank needs to make money, and the bank needs to become, support the clients and make operational. Mm-hmm. And so you're trying to find that balance between operations, and every time that you do that, you're going to have to degrade your security perimeter or your security environment to a certain degree to accommodate your end goal. And so the way for the CISOs and my staff is to constantly evaluate and make those trade-offs and decide when we have now achieved that, or we reached a place that we would view as to achieve an unacceptable risk, and then we have to have to kind of pull back a little bit and then think of another way of doing it. But there's a lot of aspects to this, and a part of it was the human on the Stone thing. Part of it was the human element of it. Well, once he got in, he made friends with other system administrators. In a way, he was able to go laterally beyond his initial set of entitlements, is that he made friends with other administrators, and he kind of got into that clique, and they allowed him, and they broke protocol by granting him privileges to areas that he was not authorized for.
But you're not suggesting hire antisocial people, I assume.
Well, it helps.
It does help.
Actually,
So there is hope for all the geeks out there.
I'd like to just comment on what Mark said. Is and I fell into this trap when you very first asked the question, Professor, is, well, how do you stop somebody from getting a USB drive in? The answer is you don't. It's not going to happen. Give up now. So what you have to do is, one, contain the damage, and two, try and make them not want to do it. Happy employees, correct policies and procedures, things that are administered in a way, everyone hates the fact that security sucks, but if you can somehow get them to understand why it's there and keep a robust perimeter and make sure that everybody is bought into the reasons behind it, those are your best bets. Because this is not a problem technology will solve. If your entire idea behind this is that I make sure that nobody can ever copy something onto a USB drive, you've already lost. Now, you should still try to keep technology in the path. Security is a layered defense, right? It should not, there's no magic bullet. You have to have lots and lots of things. But one of those layers, perhaps the most important layer, is the human element. Making sure your employees don't want to steal the data and don't have a reason to steal the data, which obviously wouldn't have helped the Snowden incident, but can help lots of companies in general, is your really only defense. That's got to be one of your massive layers in there. So good luck with that.
So one aspect to augment the recent discussion is that the title of this panel is Security and Privacy. So given the reliance that we all have on digitization and IT to support a lot of our activities, you're seeing a lot more of that conundrum between privacy. And I believe it actually is, in a lot of ways, a conundrum between privacy and information security. So information security countermeasures will support the privacy controls of what you consider to be PII or protected information or sensitive information for your customers or for whatever. But you're going to give up privacy on how folks interact with your system in your data. In order to do the protection, you're going to have to reduce the privacy. You're going to have to really monitor behavioral aspects of employees, external folks that are clients, third parties, processes and hardware processes that are acting on behalf of users' applications. And to do that, we have to make sure that we're comfortable in achieving that level of monitoring and sophistication, which is another aspect of the whole NSA thing, not so much of what Snowden did, but what he is essentially released as a capability in another area for the government, is information security, to do it right in the company, you have to increase monitoring internally to look at the threats and look at the tactics and techniques and tradecraft of whatever adversary, both internal or external, so you can be agile enough to implement the necessary countermeasures.
Well, that actually is a segue into the second set of things that I said
I know,
we
I
would
was
talk
helping you
about,
out there, Joe.
which is, thank you, it was a perfect setup. And that is, well, it's emerging technology, and we know the people issue is always going to be an issue, and you can't make the people issues go away. You have to work with that. But we're here at MIT, which has innovation in its DNA, basically. And I see a whole bunch of young companies and startups that are coming along with solutions to some of these problems. So if we're going to acknowledge that we can't defend the network from attack, how do we deal with it when it's inside? Those are some interesting kinds of technologies. Actually, I'm aware of one USB hardware solution that is out there. It's an MIT spin-off, Gigavation, which has actually secured the USB port, which is an interesting thing. So if you see where I am sort of spanning these two things, I see all this interesting stuff going on here, and I see the large companies. And the question is, how do we put those two together? And what are the impediments to that? And perhaps even the CIO Symposium can help in that in some way as a conduit. But what are, from a large company viewpoint, what are the impediments to bringing some of these new technologies in, or how do they find the new technologies? Any observations from either personal experience or watching other people deal with this? You don't want to be the first guy to try something unless you got a real problem, I guess. But any observations?
I mean, I can tell you, because we're about 63, 64 employees, so we're sort of getting a little bit out of the startup phase now. But and we have a bunch of big clients, right? We have some Fortune 500 customers, and it's challenging, right? Because we find ourselves in a situation a lot of times where they need a solution, and they're looking at us because we're the closest to what they need on the market. But what they really need is not available from anybody, really. So, depending on the solution, sometimes I think if you have a big IT department, it's possible to build it yourself or attempt to do that. But I think in general, I think big companies are going to have to get better, at least in the security space, at working with certain startups until the sort of new wave of security startups matures a little bit. I suspect over the next decade, you will see some private equity firms and some big existing players like Symantec and McAfee through Intel and roll up a bunch of the pieces of security startups that are out there. But that's a long way from happening. And so we've had to do something, even when we were small as 20 or 30 people, we had to get on the phone with like these chief information security officers, right? So we felt like we're totally out of our element now. They're asking questions and like we don't even know what that word means, right? We have to go look it up and figure it out. And so we realized early on that we had to invest as a startup in security related issues much earlier than we normally would.
It's interesting, I don't know if you've read the book Hackers. It goes back a ways, but it describes when Microsoft was a very young company and IBM, they were doing a partnership, and they were totally unprepared for the IBM people that came in and tried to figure out whether physical security was there. Did they have chicken wire over the suspended ceiling? So the mindsets were totally different there. I guess one of the things for the CIOs in the audience is that, just around Kendall Square and MIT, there's just quite a vibrant community of large companies having outposts to keep a view on what's going on. That explains partly why Microsoft, Amazon, all of Google are all sitting around. So, one of the things, if you're looking for, what are the next things I ought to be worried about, is to consider having, some physical presence here and just eyes and ears open. I think that could facilitate it. Again, maybe the CIO Symposium could help on that.
Yeah, so I think the small companies provide a valuable factor because they're agile. They can actually see an issue and they can put the necessary resources to address very specific issues that are in the information security space that are affecting us. I think one of the issues that we have as a consumer of that in some of the larger other companies is how do you integrate all of these little stovepipe type activities into a cohesive security strategy? And each of the individual small innovation companies don't do that necessarily. It's really that next layer of, because you don't want to have 1,000 small security solutions, because if you add them all up, they don't actually always equate to a large security solution. So where this integration, the security integration into a strategic security to make sure that you're meeting your security, your business goals, I think that's where the companies are lacking, and I think the smaller companies, to get better traction, need to offer not only what do we do, but how can we fit in, and how do we fit into your larger environment, and how do we fit into a larger strategic security architecture that you're trying to proliferate as a company.
Right, and I think one of the issues there is that each company is trying to address its own problems without any set standards. So every company you go into, you have to discover what their processes are and how to fit into it. So it is a challenge, and we'll try to figure that out over time. I'd like to switch to the next topic, which was what about organization and culture? As a result of Target and Snowden, the whole data security privacy visibility has gone up the stack to the CEO and the board level. We have a legal environment in which there are over 50 federal laws covering various parts of security and privacy. The FTC is advocating, a massive control and takeover of a lot of that. And over 80 plus countries have separate data privacy laws. All of this is becoming a much more difficult environment to work in. 2 days ago, I'm on the board of some companies, and 2 days ago I got a mailer from the New York Stock Exchange advertising a program in a few weeks called Cybersecurity in the Boardroom. And so if you're up to the board level where, the question is, does anyone up there even understand any of this stuff? You now have an opportunity as a CIO. You're getting visibility. The question is, what do you do? What do you ask for? And I think we saw some good examples of that in the last panel before lunch. But I thought it would be interesting just to read part of the brochure on the cybersecurity in the boardroom. And it said as follows: how many of these questions can your board answer? 1, what is the most common mistake companies make within the first 24 hours after a data breach? What does your business continuity plan look like as it relates to cyber risk for business interruption and/or breach of confidentiality? What are your digital opportunities that could change your business strategy 5 years from now? What is your financial and reputational exposure to a cyber attack? And how are customers getting into your systems? What safeguards are in place? And how is your C-suite monitoring and upgrading those safeguards? Now, these are very high-level things which the board should be asking questions about, not because they know the answers, but the role of the board is to be asking the right kind of questions. So I don't know if you would add any other questions to that, to the uninitiated board members. What kind of questions should they be asking if you're the CIO and you want to get their attention? Any thoughts on that? Or anything about culture? I've left them speechless. This is the first time.
So I think as somebody who reports to a board of directors, I think it's difficult. I think what's particularly difficult sometimes is that if these people tend to be, they tend to be more mature individuals. They tend to maybe not have operational roles anymore, but to be, maybe just investors or everything else. And so sometimes they have a lot of knowledge, but they're not up on the latest technologies and everything else. And so I find that the best thing you can do is be incredibly proactive in teaching them what they need to know. I mean, we've done for years, once a year, bring somebody in to a board meeting who educates the board about security. And they yawn, they don't necessarily enjoy it, but particularly, I mean, you have an investor, he was a sales guy all his life or something like that. It's not the number one thing that he likes to talk about. But if you can put it in dollar terms for them, like we're spending this amount of dollars to make sure we don't have to spend this amount of dollars someday to, cover our asses, then you're in a much better situation. So.
You do get their attention, 90 class action suits, all of that sort of thing. And then, Mark, I think you said there's that double-edged sword, be careful what you ask for.
Yeah, well, there's the classic conundrum. If you spend an X amount of dollars on cybersecurity and nothing happens, then they say, why did we spend so much money on cybersecurity? And conversely, if you spend the same amount of money and you get breached, they say, well, if we gave you all that much money, how come we still got breached? So you really can't win. In my case, I've been at State Street for 10 months, and I've briefed the board 8 times on cybersecurity. Wow. I think part of it, of course, some of them I walk in, I introduce myself, and they immediately start playing Angry Birds on their iPads or something. But we actually
on
do
the
get
secure network, right?
Yeah, some do listen. I think a lot of now the boards are told they have to hear cybersecurity. I'm not sure they know exactly why they need to hear it. And basically, the culture is that we know it, we need to do it. It's a necessary evil. We want you to keep doing it. We'll spend some money on it, but you better not impact business. And so finding where that balance is and making sure and doing that is, I think, the critical aspect of showing them really the return on investment. To show them, and I firmly believe this as being in this business for a long time, and is that cybersecurity is, and we just need a better job of portraying it that way. It is an enabler for doing business, and it's certainly in today's world, and it's not an obstacle to overcome in order to get your job done. I think it's still viewed in a lot of places as that, it's an obstacle, and I would be much more productive. My business, I would bring in, billions of dollars more revenue if I didn't have to deal with putting in a password every time. And so I think that's part of the mentality. Right. And to answer your first question about, what do you do in the first 24 hours, if they say coming back to my old days, if the first casualty of war is the truth, the second casualty of war is the war plan. And so you've really got to have that laid out exactly what you're going to. You can't. And the other saying is, you don't exchange business cards at a crisis. You have to know how to do this before. You've got to exercise it, and you've got to exercise it often, so you know who to call, you know how to respond, you have your legal involved. That's the other thing, is that you're going to see this merging of cybersecurity and law, and you basically, any CISO shouldn't go anywhere without a lawyer. And so you're going to be able to and you have to have communications. You have to, every time that, even though we personally at State Street were not at all, hit by the open SSL, every client we had, and we have a lot of them, wanted to know how we're doing. And so we spent a lot of time managing client questions, expectations. They read about it in the paper, they read about it on the net. And so there's a lot of that you have to get. Even though you may not be being hit, if it's something that comes out, they want to make sure that they're fine. So,
I would think from a board perspective, CIOs are used to doing some risk assessment in terms of how they're going to attack things. Boards have been talking a lot over the last few years about the need to do risk assessment on the business, on business models, et cetera. So I think framing the conversation around not the technology, but what are the risks that we have in the business, and what are the possibilities or the outcomes, and then doing that risk assessment, risk-reward trade-off is the right way to talk to the board, rather than to say we've got an XYZ virus thing that does this, that, because they won't, most of them understand it.
Wasn't that your fourth question? What's the financial?
Yeah, these were the questions. My point in asking these questions were, this is what the brochure addressed to directors is, can you answer these questions? So I'm not sure these are the right questions, but it's the kind of the level of analysis. But if you want to answer that, what is your financial and reputational exposure?
Well, it's not so much that I want to answer that. It's that it's amazing to me that this is a question that you have to ask the board, right? I mean, the point of the board is to give strategic direction for the company and ensure that it's continued functioning in all circumstances. A cyber attack is not a possibility anymore. It's a guarantee. Someone is going to attack your company. Someone is going to try and steal your data or morph your website or screw your customers or who knows what, right? It is going to happen. In fact, it probably already has, whether you noticed it or not. The idea that the board has to be reminded to think about what happens in this circumstance, the idea, we talked about Target earlier, and they didn't have a chief information security officer. And at lunch, I actually said this out loud. I'm like, I wonder in my head, the CIO goes to the board and goes, well, we need X amount of money to hire this guy. And the board goes, that's a waste of money, right? And you can absolutely see boards saying things like that. And it scares me to death to think that there's someone out there running a company that's not taking this into account. It's like having a bank without security guards. It just doesn't make any sense. And to view cybersecurity, as much as I personally hate that particular word, but to view cybersecurity as a pure cost thing that we should minimize, and it's an actual detriment to the business as opposed to the exact opposite, as Mark was saying, is, first of all, the entirely wrong attitude, and you need new board members if that's the way they feel about it. So you can all go fire your boards, right? Because that's But what this really comes down to, I guess what I'm saying is, like all good sales, it's about education. Your board needs to not just understand what is the financial. I mean, it's a good idea to say, well, if we get a cybersecurity attack, then they steal the customer data, it could cost us $1 billion. Okay, that's great. But just like with the employees I mentioned earlier, they have to be bought into why this is a good thing. They have to have a ground state understanding and believe in their bones that this is not only good, but required and part of the business, just like anything else you do. This is not something you outsource like janitorial services. This is a core part of everyone's business. And sure, you can get consultants to help you, but if you don't have somebody inside that both understands and thinks this is a way to make the business better and make the business more money and make the business more secure in ways that help, but can also educate the board on why those things are true, then that's probably where you should work on doing.
And I think that, maybe it's a matter of CIOs sharing strategies on how to deal and educate the board. And again, maybe the CIO Symposium could have a role there as a collection point on good practices. But we really should get some questions from the audience. We've allowed some time at the end. So unless we've answered all of your questions, we can call it an early day. If there are microphones so that you get picked up on the taping? Is there some?
Yes,
use the lights. There you go.
Okay, so passwords. So we have all these devices, increasing numbers. There was just another breach on eBay today that they're telling everyone to change their passwords. What do you see the future holding, given that where we are really doesn't seem to be working? Two-factor authentication, federated trust, password managers. What do you see happening out there?
If you're not doing two-factor today, you're behind. First of all, biometrics is probably one way that's going to help out in the future. But if I can get into your VPN with nothing but downloading, Juniper or Cisco software and typing a username and password, your security protocol is broken and needs to be fixed today. So two-factor is the bare minimum. Then we work from there.
So to echo that, one of my goals, as long as and hopefully before I leave State Street, is I want to eliminate all passwords in our system. Passwords are a complete waste of time. They're insecure. They'll never be secure. We might as well stop trying. You need to go into, as mentioned, you need to go into two-factor authentication. I think you're seeing that now. Even Target learned its lesson, as going back to the Target example. They're converting over to chip and PIN. So right now, user ID and passwords are credit card equivalent of signing on the back of what we have now, and you see how well that works. So we need to move away from passwords. Passwords, in order to make them effective, become useless operationally because you have to go to at least 14 to 16 characters to make them less ability to be hacked, and they have to be, and then people write them down or they do whatever they want to in order to remember them. And so it's just basically it's a losing battle on passwords.
So you don't think password managers are?
No, I think it's just a secure way of securing a insecure process.
System.
Yeah.
All right, fair enough. He doesn't have many opinions on things, so this is. Did that? Okay, so, let's see. We have someone over at the.
Hi, yeah, I'm a security consultant, which means I advise companies, but don't actually protect them. So sorry about that one.
So no liability, right?
No liability, but I did a couple things. I did get a board member question once that asked me, well, how secure are we? So I don't know if, to try to answer that question was nearly impossible. I'm not asking you to answer the whole thing, but I think the big concern I have, in the future that's going to be a challenge is the whole vendor management piece, even for cloud service providers. One, in having access to the systems. I used to work for a company where we had almost 100,000 modems, right, where vendors connected. They were unsecured, and we had to disable them. Today, we find companies still don't have good vendor monitoring practices. I think, number two, having contracts with vendors you're going to see the legal costs go up, because right now, the payment card industry is requiring service providers to acknowledge they're responsible for cardholder data in their contracts. I've never seen a contract written out with a cloud provider that really specifies responsibilities and who's liable for those things. And I know legal costs are now escalating in that. Do you agree that that's a huge area of weakness?
Yes, also you haven't read your cloud contract, because I guarantee it tells you exactly who's responsible, and it ain't the cloud provider.
Well, the other question is too, who's responsible for liability when someone hacks into your bank accounts, and no one can seem to answer that either. So.
Well, I mentioned at lunch that it's nice that the contracts say those things, and that's a starting point, but there are some old cases where the classic one was a shipping company that had a ship out there that was lost in a big storm that could have been saved. It was all agreed if they had had a marine radio. And marine radios are not required by law, and certainly there were no contractual requirements to have them, but they were held liable for under tort, under the theory that this is something that could have been prevented with easily available technology, and you were irresponsible, basically, for doing that, and they were held liable. So it may be that the contracts are nice and the legal costs, and maybe at some point we do have to address this. We can't just say, I waive all my rights and I'm okay.
To address your first question about the board, one of the first board meetings I went, the question, do you feel that we're secure? And since I was new, I could say no and blame it on my predecessor. But I may not be able to use that much longer. But
now he says, I don't know, I'm still finding out stuff.
Yeah.
Which is the honest answer, right?
And then I blame it on the operations folks. Yeah. But I think that's a tough question, because they're trying to make, secure against what, and this is an inevitability. And I think as a CISO, if you ever actually think you're secure, you probably do need to retire or move on, because you're only as, and if you are secure, if you ever really reach that, and you firmly believe you reached that nirvana state of security, whatever that may be, you're only there for a split second. And then it's already passed. By the time you actually put it down on your PowerPoint to give to the board, it's already probably OBE.
Yeah, I think it also comes down to educating your board members so that the quality of the questions and depth of the questions are a little bit more toward,
Well, the
issues
biggest
at
thing
hand.
is, as my boss says, and I think he says it very eloquently, and he's not here, so I'm not sucking up to him, is it's not so bad if we give the board a stick to beat us over the head with. We just got to give them the right stick.
And that's a small stick, hopefully.
All right, thank you.
Let's see, over here.
Yeah, so you talked a little bit about changing the picture of who we think the threat is, and we also spoke a little bit about it being a multi-piece picture for security. I know that when we look at website usability or other types of software usability, we try to imagine a persona and what that person might do interacting with our systems. And I'm wondering if there's something similar that would be useful in the security field to sort of like, what would this person's target be? How long would it need to be, unnoticed of a breach or that type of thing? And if you use something like that in your work.
Yes, we try to manage the incoming hacker all the time. The problem is that that's never perfect.
I mean, not like just a general, but like, like what specific hackers would want with specific targets.
So what you try to do is you realize you can't predict everything, so you look and see what your crown jewels are, and that's a common term that's used. Your critical processes, your critical data, and you try to up the game on those, realizing that you're trying to there's a lot of techniques you can use. You can use honeypot. You can try to figure out what their tradecraft and techniques are in order to be able to ascertain how they're trying to get. Remember, the longer they're in your network, the more recon they're going to do and the more effective they're going to be. One of the other key things is a lot of people do pen testing or they do security vulnerability testing. One of the flaws within that process is when the people you hire to do that, if you do it internally for a large degree, is they think like defenders. You have to have people that think like attackers, and it's a different game. The biggest advantage that attackers have over defenders is defenders play by rules, attackers don't play by rules. And so you've got to get into that mentality, because you've got to think about how they would do it over a long period of time and what targets or what objectives they're trying to achieve. And that's how you need to gear, and those change over time as well. That's where the agility of your processes come in play. So you don't just build these Maginot lines and hopefully they all stack themselves up against them and they can't get by. You have to be agile.
You know, it's partly about compensation systems. I'll tell you a little MIT thing. There was a basic compiler course here for years, and I don't know if it's still the same way. You had 4 machine problems, and if you could get into the grader and change it, you were entitled to whatever grade you could put in there. And so the compensation system worked quite well there, and the professors used to watch the people that could really hack the system, and then those are the people I wanted to work with. So maybe we need a little bit different model on, crowdsourced breakmysystem.com or something. Over here, yes?
Sure. If I could go back to the comment you made, and I think it's reality about you spend what you spend in IT, and if you don't get breached, you spend too much. If you do get breached, you didn't spend it right. What should the conversation look like? And it's not only a board conversation. I think it's also a C-suite conversation, right? Because $1 spent on security is potentially $1 not spent somewhere else. What should that conversation look like about getting to whatever the right number is, recognizing it's probably not going to be the right number a year from now when you're looking in retrospect?
Tough question.
I would look at it the way that you would look at any other kind of investment you would make that had a lot of uncertainty and ambiguity, right? You kind of got to do your best job to analyze what you think the probabilities are, which sometimes it's just the swag. You kind of don't know what the damage is if one of those probabilities strikes. So the same kind of process that you would use if you're like, hey, we're going to go launch this new product line. Here's how successful we think it will or won't be. Here's the investment required to sort of hit that number. I would do sort of the inverse of that process on the security side.
And I think that is a C-level kind of thing and a board-level thing. It's the management under uncertainty is sort of the classic set of issues.
Well, as Joe mentioned earlier, I think we're moving classically away from a compliance-driven security model where you just do all these things and you check off. And if you have an IPS, do you have a firewall? Do you have identity management? If you have all these things, by some magic combination of all the additive property of security, you are now secure. I think now you're going to a risk, and kind of what I alluded to in the previous answer, is you're moving to a risk-managed approach. So you're looking at what emerging threats are, you're looking at your architecture, where you need to go from an operational standpoint, how best to protect that to the level that you think that you're comfortable with, that at least what you can do is you increase the cost of the attack to the attackers. The idea is that, certainly in my field, we don't get a lot of smash and grab attack. It's mostly sustained APT where they're looking for larger payout. If you can increase their cost and their ability to, their parameters on what they're doing the cost, they're going to move on to somebody else, hopefully, or they realize that it's not worth, the return for them is not worth it. You're trying to up their cost. So those are the models that we're trying to incorporate. Where I am is to try to do this more in a risk-based approach, not just a straight, if we do these 5 things, we're somehow magically secure.
Thank you.
Good. Well, I think we've just about come to the end of the hour. I want to thank the panel for all of their insight on this and for their willingness to come on a nice day and be inside in the basement here.
It's actually less sunnier outside than it is on
up
this
here.
day.
So join me in thanking them.
That's a big one.
And we're ready to...
Yeah, I just wanted to once again thank our panel and our moderator on behalf of the MIT Sloan CIO Symposium, and I know on behalf of everybody in this packed auditorium. I know that although we talked a lot of different solutions, I'm not going to be able to sleep well tonight. So in view of that, we have a couple of token gifts for our panelists and our moderator.